Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Dax Corin never intended to start a planetary scandal. He had only been on Veilfar for a week, and so far, he had managed to avoid getting stabbed, eaten, or challenged to single combat. Until now. The Veilfar were a proud warrior race, all sharp horns, gleaming armor, and traditions that made no sense to an Earthborn engineer like Dax. He was here for trade negotiations, not to test his survival skills. But one misstep, one stupid joke taken seriously, and now he was standing in the middle of the royal feast hall, every alien warrior in the room glaring at him. Across from him, Princess Savra Veldran stood, arms crossed, her piercing golden eyes locked onto his. She was tall, easily 6 inches taller than Dax, with midnight blue skin, braided silver hair, and an aura that could make a warlord flinch. She was the most feared warrior in the Empire, and Dax had just accidentally challenged her to marriage. The problem started with Veilthari humor. Apparently, it involved boasts and tests of strength. Things Dax was absolutely terrible at. When Savra had jokingly said, "A true mate would win my hand through battle, but such a thing is impossible for a weakling human." Dax, assuming she was teasing him, had smirked and shrugged. "I love a challenge," he had said. A beat of silence. Then, chaos. The warriors roared in either laughter or rage. A massive general slammed his fist against the table. An elder choked on his drink. And Savra, she just stared. Dax blinked at the reaction. Wait, was she serious? An old warrior stood, his deep voice shaking the walls. The human has spoken. He has accepted the champion's challenge. Dax felt his stomach drop. The what now? Savra's expression was unreadable, but her golden eyes narrowed. Slowly, she stepped forward until she stood right before him, close enough that Dax could see the faint glow of her skin under the torchlight. "Do you understand what you've done, Terran?" she asked, her voice low. Dax swallowed. Probably not. Her lips curved into something between amusement and exasperation. "The champion's challenge is an ancient trial. To win my hand, you must defeat all who challenge your claim." Dax glanced around. The warriors were eager, their muscles tensed, their hands on their weapons. "Oh." He turned back to Savra. "And if I lose?" Her grin was sharp. "Then your head will make a fine decoration for the Great Hall." Dax sighed, rubbing his temples. Fantastic. Just fantastic. He had come to negotiate a trade deal, not to become some kind of alien gladiator. But one look at the warriors, especially the 7-foot-tall brute eyeing him like a meal, and he realized that backing out wasn't an option. His mind raced. If brute strength wouldn't work, maybe Earth logic could save him. With a slow, confident smirk, he looked Savra straight in the eyes. "All right, I'll do it." The room erupted into cheers, roars, and the sound of weapons clashing against armor. Savra just watched him, her expression unreadable. For the first time in her life, she had no idea if she wanted this challenger to win or lose. Dax Corin sat on the edge of a stone battle platform, staring at the arena where he would soon have to fight for his life. His mind raced. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had come to Veilfar for trade talks, not to end up in some ancient trial by combat for a warrior princess's hand. The worst part, backing out wasn't an option. The moment he had accepted the challenge, the entire hall had erupted into roars of approval. He was now officially bound by Veilthari law. Either he won the champion's challenge, or he died trying. "Fantastic," he muttered. A shadow loomed over him. Savra Veldran, the woman at the center of this madness, stood with her arms crossed. Her golden eyes studied him with amusement. "You do not look like a warrior," she said. Dax glanced up at her. Tall, strong, built like a living blade. If he wasn't so busy worrying about his survival, he'd admit she was stunning in a terrifying way. "That's because I'm not," he admitted. "I'm an engineer. I fix things. I negotiate deals. I do not fight in gladiator death matches." Savra raised an eyebrow. "Then why did you accept the challenge?" Dax exhaled sharply. "I thought you were joking." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to his surprise, Savra laughed. It was a deep, rich sound, like thunder before a storm. "You are either very bold or very foolish, Terran." She tilted her head. "Perhaps both." Dax ran a hand through his dark hair. "Probably." Then, narrowing his eyes, he asked, "There's no way out of this, is there?" Savor smirked. "Only two ways. Win or die." Dax groaned. Savra watched him for a moment before stepping closer. She was intrigued. This human was not like the others she had met. Most off-worlders feared the Veilthar. They called them savages, beasts of war. But Dax, he spoke to her like an equal. He questioned everything, even when outmatched. That was interesting. "You are clever," she admitted. "Perhaps you can survive." Dax gave a dry chuckle. "Gee, thanks. That's comforting." Savra's golden eyes gleamed. "I did not say it would be easy, but I will offer you advice." Dax perked up. "Oh, do tell, O mighty warrior princess." She smirked at his sarcasm but continued. "The first trial will be the trial of blades. Your opponent will expect brute strength. Do not fight with strength you do not have. Use your mind." Dax nodded slowly. That made sense. The Veilthar prized power. They expected warriors to fight head-on. But that wasn't how humans survived. Humans adapted. "All right," he said. "Trial of blades. Got it. What's after that?" Savra's smirk widened. "You survived the first one, and I might tell you." Dax narrowed his eyes. "You enjoy this, don't you?" "Immensely." He sighed. "Of course you do." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Dax alone with his thoughts. He glanced back at the arena. Warriors were already preparing the battlegrounds. The crowd was gathering. His first trial was coming. "All right, Dax," he muttered to himself. "You got yourself into this. Time to think your way out." And with that, he stood, ready to face the impossible. Dax Korin stood in the center of the Veilthari combat arena, rolling his shoulders as he eyed his opponent, a towering warrior named Vorak, whose muscles looked like they had been carved from solid stone. The alien's deep red skin gleamed under the harsh light, and his jagged black armor made him look like a walking war machine. Vorak held two curved swords, each as long as Dax's arm. He grinned, revealing sharp teeth. "Terran, I will make this quick." Dax gave a nervous chuckle. "Oh, that's nice of you. I appreciate efficiency." The crowd of warriors roared, eager for blood. Above them, seated on an elevated throne, Princess Savra Veldran watched with calm, unreadable eyes. Dax took a deep breath. His heart pounded, but he reminded himself of what Savra had said earlier. "Your opponent will expect brute strength. Do not fight with strength you do not have. Use your mind." "All right, no brute force. Think." A loud gong sounded. The fight had begun. Vorak charged like a war beast, his twin swords a blur of silver. Dax barely dodged the first slash. Feeling the air whoosh past his face, he stumbled back, barely avoiding the second strike. The crowd laughed. To them, this was just another weak human delaying the inevitable. "Okay," Dax muttered. "New plan. Stop dodging and start thinking." Vorak swung again, a powerful overhead strike. But just as the blade came down, Dax did something unexpected. Instead of blocking or dodging, he stepped forward. The move caught Vorak off guard. His sword sliced down, but instead of hitting flesh, it hit the stone ground with a loud clang. Dax was already moving. With a quick twist, he stepped under Vorak's guard, grabbed a loose strap on his opponent's armor, and yanked. The larger warrior stumbled. The crowd gasped. Dax didn't wait. He grabbed a handful of sand from the arena floor and threw it into Vorak's face. Vorak roared in rage, blinded for a moment. That moment was all Dax needed. He ducked, spun behind the warrior, and kicked the back of his knee, hard. With a grunt, Vorak collapsed onto one knee. The arena fell silent. Dax ripped a blade from Vorak's loosened grip and held it to the warrior's throat. He leaned in, smirking. "I win." A long pause, then thunderous cheers. The Veilthari warriors roared in shock and approval. Savra, still seated on her throne, arched an eyebrow, impressed. Vorak, to his credit, gave a deep laugh. "You fight like a coward, Terran." Dax shrugged. I fight to win." Vorak nodded, grinning despite his defeat. Then he stood and raised Dax's arm in victory. "The human has passed the first trial," an elder announced. Dax sighed in relief. 1 trial down. 2 more to go. From her throne, Savra watched him closely. This human was something different, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted him to fail or succeed. Dax Corin sat on the edge of a stone bench in the warrior's barracks, rubbing his sore shoulder. His body ached from the fight, but at least he was still breathing. The first trial had been a success. Somehow. Across from him, Vorak sat as well, still smirking. The massive warrior had cleaned the sand from his face, and his red skin gleamed under the dim torchlight. "You fight like a thief in the night, Terran," Vorak said, his deep voice carrying amusement. Dax exhaled, rolling his stiff wrist. "Yeah, well, if you fought fair against someone twice your size, you'd be dead in about 5 seconds. Vorak chuckled, a deep booming laugh. "True enough, you may be small, but you are not weak. You have earned my respect." Dax blinked. "Wait, really?" Vorak nodded, leaning forward. "Few outsiders survive a trial against me. You saw your weakness and turned it into an advantage. That is the way of a true warrior." Dax wasn't sure what to say. A few hours ago, this guy had been trying to slice him in half. Now they were sharing a casual conversation like old friends. Before he could respond, the doors to the barracks swung open. A tall figure stepped inside, Princess Savra Veldran. Dax tensed. Despite everything, Savra still intimidated him. Golden eyes sharp, silver hair braided with warrior's rings, and an air of absolute authority. She moved with the confidence of someone who never lost. "Come with me," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Dax glanced at Vorak, who smirked and gave him a nod. "Go, Terran. You have caught the princess's eye." Dax sighed. "Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of." Still, he followed Savra through the halls of the Grand Palace. The walls were decorated with weapons, banners, and murals of great battles. It was a warrior's kingdom, through and through. Finally, they reached a balcony overlooking the city. The twin moons of Vaelthar shone brightly over towering spires, and the distant roar of warriors celebrating the tournament filled the night. Savra leaned against the railing, studying him. "You fight well, for a human." Dax snorted. "You sound surprised." She turned to face him fully. "I am. Most outsiders see us as mindless brutes. They do not think to learn our ways." Dax shrugged. "I didn't exactly have a choice." Savra's lips quirked upward. "Perhaps not, but you survived. That means something here." For a moment, there was silence. Then, curiosity got the better of Dax. "So, what's next? Another trial?" Savra nodded. "The trial of endurance. At dawn, you will be taken into the fire plains, where the heat and storms will test your strength. You must survive until nightfall." Dax stared. "That's it? Just survive?" Savra smirked. "The fire plains are no ordinary wasteland. There are beasts, shifting sands, and heat strong enough to boil weaker men from the inside." Dax exhaled. "Great, so I survived a sword fight just to die of heatstroke." Savra stepped closer, her golden eyes locked onto his. There was something in her gaze, something he couldn't quite read. "You may not be the strongest Terran, but you are clever. Use that, and you might just survive." Dax held her gaze for a moment, then smirked. "Is that your way of saying you are rooting for me?" Savra's expression remained unreadable. "I am saying it would be a shame if you died too soon." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Dax alone with the realization that tomorrow might be even worse than today. The sunrise over the fire plains was a cruel thing. It wasn't warm or gentle. It was a blazing inferno, turning the rocky wasteland into a shimmering sea of heat waves. Dax Corin wiped sweat from his brow and muttered, "I hate this trial already." The Vaelthari warriors had brought him to the edge of this brutal wasteland, handed him a small water flask, and left him with nothing but a single rule: survive until nightfall. As the warriors rode away on their massive reptilian beasts, Dax turned to Vorak, the only one who had bothered to offer advice. "Anything I should know before you leave me to die?" Dax asked. Vorak chuckled. Do not stop moving. The heat will cook you if you stand still too long. Fantastic, Dax muttered. Vorak smirked, but his expression turned serious. And watch for the sand striders. They hunt anything weak enough to fall. Sand what? But Vorak was already riding away, leaving Dax alone with the scorching wind and endless dunes. By midday, Dax was dying for shade. The heat was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just hot, it was suffocating. His clothes clung to his body, his boots sank into the burning sand, and his flask was already half empty. Just great, he muttered, trapped on an alien death world, burning alive. I should have stayed on the ship. A low rumbling interrupted his complaints. Dax froze. The sand beneath him shifted. Then, suddenly, the ground erupted. A massive creature burst from the dunes, sending sand flying in all directions. It was long and spindly, its chitin-covered body shimmering under the harsh sun. 8 razor-sharp legs clawed at the ground, and 2 piercing red eyes locked onto Dax. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Dax groaned. The sand strider let out a high-pitched screech before lunging. Dax dove sideways, rolling across the hot sand as the creature's blade-like legs sliced the air where he had just stood. He scrambled to his feet. Running wasn't an option. The thing was faster, stronger, and perfectly built for this environment. He had to outthink it. Dax's eyes darted across the dunes. A cracked stone pillar, half buried in the sand, stood a few meters away. It wasn't much, but it was the only solid structure in sight. "All right, big guy," Dax muttered, gripping a small dagger from his belt. "Let's see how dumb you are." He took off toward the pillar. The sand strider shrieked and chased him, its legs kicking up dust as it closed the gap. Just before reaching the pillar, Dax pivoted hard, throwing all his weight to the side. The sand strider lunged forward, too fast to stop. Its massive body slammed into the stone pillar, cracking it apart on impact. Dax didn't hesitate. He leaped onto the creature's back, raised his dagger, and drove it into the soft spot beneath its skull. The creature gave a horrible screech, its body twitching violently, then collapsed into the sand. Dax rolled off, panting, drenched in sweat. He stared at the dead creature, then let out a weak laugh. "I cannot believe that worked." As the sun crept lower in the sky, Dax sat beside the fallen beast, trying to recover. He was exhausted, overheated, and still hours away from winning this trial. And yet, somewhere, deep inside, he felt a strange sense of pride. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand what it meant to be a warrior. Dax Corin wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the horizon. The sun was starting to sink, turning the fire plains into a landscape of molten gold and deep shadows. He had survived the worst of the heat, but the trial wasn't over yet. His throat was parched, and his flask was completely empty. His body ached from the fight with the sand strider, and exhaustion tugged at his muscles. "Just a little longer," he muttered to himself. "You made it this far. Don't die now." He pushed forward, one step at a time, ignoring the sharp pain in his legs. The fire plains stretched endlessly before him, but in the distance, he saw something strange. A dark shape, barely visible through the heat haze. A structure, a ruin. Hope flickered in his chest. If he could find shelter, he might have a better chance of making it through the final hours of the trial. Summoning the last of his strength, he forced himself toward it. By the time he reached the ruins, the sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked stone. The ruins looked ancient, massive pillars, half buried in the sand, and strange carvings etched into the walls. Dax collapsed against a pillar, breathing heavily. The shade was bliss. "Okay," he muttered. "Just sit here, stay awake, and wait for nightfall. Easy." A low growl shattered that plan. Dax's blood turned cold. Slowly, he turned his head. Perched atop a broken column, golden eyes glowed in the dim light. A sleek feline-like creature crouched there, its midnight black fur rippling like liquid shadow. Its long tail swayed, and its razor-sharp claws dug into the stone. "Of course," Dax whispered, "because this day wasn't bad enough already." The shadow beast leaped from the column, landing without a sound. It stalked closer, its muscles coiling like a spring. Dax knew running was pointless. He was exhausted, dehydrated, and weaponless, aside from the small dagger at his belt. He needed to outthink it. Fast. His eyes flicked to the ruined pillars, the carvings, the broken pathways, the collapsed structures. They weren't random. This place had been built for something. Dax took a slow step backward, trying to lead the creature toward a deep crevice in the stone. "Come on, big guy," he murmured. "Let's see how good you are at jumping." The beast's ears flicked forward. Then it lunged. At the last second, Dax sidestepped and kicked off the stone wall. The creature, moving too fast to stop, soared straight over him and into the crevice. A loud snarl echoed from below, followed by the sound of claws scraping frantically against stone. Dax peered over the edge. The beast was trapped, its powerful legs struggling to find a foothold. "Ha!" Dax let out a weak laugh. "That's what you get for trying to eat me." The creature hissed, but it couldn't escape. Dax slumped against the ruins, heart pounding. His body screamed for rest, but he had won. The sun finally vanished beyond the horizon. A loud horn echoed through the fire plains. His trial was over. In the distance, he saw figures approaching on massive reptilian mounts, the Veiltheri warriors, coming to retrieve him. Dax let his head fall back against the stone, laughing breathlessly. "I am never doing this again." But as he saw Princess Savra Veldran leading the riders, her golden eyes watching him with something close to admiration, he had a feeling his trials were far from over. Dax Corin sat slumped against the stone ruins, his body aching, his throat dry. The fire plains had pushed him to his limits, but he had survived. Now, as the Veiltheri warriors approached on their massive reptilian mounts, he forced himself to stand. His legs wobbled, but he refused to show weakness. At the front of the riders, Princess Savra Veldran dismounted with effortless grace. Her golden eyes studied him carefully. She was still dressed in ceremonial armor, her silver hair pulled back in a tight braid. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked at the dead sand strider and the deep crevice where the shadow beast still struggled. Then, she turned back to him, expression unreadable. "You live." Dax wiped his dry lips. "Yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence." Behind Savra, Vorak let out a booming laugh. "This Terran refuses to die. I like him." Dax gave a tired smirk. "I'd like me too. I'd like me even more with a drink of water." Savra didn't smile, but she tossed him a fresh water flask. He caught it and drank greedily, the cool liquid reviving him instantly. Then she spoke again. "You fought the desert, the heat, the beasts, and you endured. You have proven yourself in the trial of endurance." Dax wiped his mouth, his heart still racing from adrenaline. "Great. So what now?" Savra stepped closer, her piercing gaze locked onto his. "Now you return with us, and the elders will decide if you are worthy of standing beside me." Dax raised an eyebrow. "Beside you, as in?" Vorak clapped him hard on the back. "As her warrior mate." Dax choked on his water. Wait, what?" Savra crossed her arms. "You challenged our ways, fought our warriors, and survived our trials. By tradition, that means you are a potential candidate." Dax stared at her, half in shock, half in disbelief. "You're telling me that by nearly dying 5 different times, I accidentally proposed?" Vorak howled with laughter. "It is a great honor." Dax rubbed his face. "Yeah, well, Earth girls usually prefer a simple dinner and conversation first." Savra tilted her head slightly, curiosity flashing in her golden eyes. "Our traditions are not so simple." Dax sighed. "Yeah, I'm getting that." He glanced at the warriors surrounding him, some still watching him with amusement, others with quiet respect. They had tested him, pushed him, but now he wasn't just an outsider. He was one of them. Savra studied him for a long moment, then turned. "Come, the elders are waiting." Dax hesitated, then exhaled. "Fine, but if the next trial involves fighting a dragon or something, I'm officially quitting." Vorak grinned. "No dragons, just more warriors." Dax groaned. "Of course." As he climbed onto a reptilian mount, Savra glanced at him again, and this time, there was something different in her expression. Something almost approving. Dax wasn't sure what that meant yet, but as they rode back toward the Veil Ferry stronghold, one thing was clear. This was far from over. Dax Corin stood in the great hall of the Veil Ferry stronghold, his hands clenched into fists. The room was massive, lined with towering stone pillars, and filled with the flickering glow of blue fire torches. At the center sat the Elder Council, a group of warriors who had ruled for generations. And at the front of them, Princess Sevra Veldran. She stood tall and regal, her silver hair catching the firelight, her golden eyes unreadable. Dax swallowed. This was it. The final decision. One of the elders, a battle-scarred woman named Ishtan, rose from her seat. Her gaze was piercing. Dax Corin of Terra, you have survived the trials. You have fought, endured, and proven your strength. Dax shifted, still feeling the ache in his muscles from the fire plains. Yeah, nearly died a few times too. Vorak, standing nearby, grinned. That is the way of warriors. Ishtan ignored him. By our traditions, you have earned the right to stand beside Princess Sevra as her warrior mate. But before this is decided, we must ask, do you accept this honor? The hall fell silent. Dax felt a dozen pairs of eyes watching him, waiting. His mind raced. He had never planned for this. He had only wanted to survive, to prove he wasn't just some weak outsider. And now, they were offering him a place among them. A future. His gaze flickered to Sevra. She was calm, unreadable, but something about the way she stood told him she was just as tense as he was. Was this just duty for her? Tradition? Or did she actually? Dax took a slow breath. Then, he smirked. All right, but I have one condition. Murmurs spread through the hall. Sevra's eyes narrowed slightly. You dare to make demands? Dax shrugged. I'm human. We're stubborn like that. Ishtan raised an eyebrow. Speak, Terran. Dax crossed his arms. I won't just be some trophy warrior. If I do this, I do it my way. No outdated rules, no blind obedience. I fight for the Veil Ferry, but I fight as me. The silence deepened. Then, Sevra smiled. Just a small smile, barely there, but it was real. She turned to the elders. Then it is settled. Ishtan studied Dax for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. So be it. The warriors pounded their fists against their chests, a deep, thunderous sound that echoed through the hall. Dax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Vorak clapped him on the back. Welcome to the madness, human. Dax laughed. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Sevra stepped closer, her golden eyes locked onto his. You are still an outsider, still reckless, but perhaps not entirely foolish. Dax grinned. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. She smirked. Do not get used to it. As the cheers of warriors filled the hall, Dax realized something. He had come to this world as a stranger, a challenge. Now, he was one of them. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't so out of place after all.